The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty plains as Maria Elena struggled against the rough rope that bound her wrists to the wooden post. Her dark hair fell in tangled waves around her face, streaked with dirt and sweat from 3 days of captivity. The men who had taken her spoke in harsh whispers about her mixed heritage, spitting words like half-breed and savage, as if they tasted bitter on their tongues. She remembered the day they came to her small homestead clearly. Her mother, a gentle woman from the Lakota tribe, had been tending to their vegetable garden while Maria Elena fed the chickens. Her father, a Spanish settler, was away trading horses in the nearest town. The men arrived like a dust storm, sudden and violent, claiming that anyone with indigenous blood was a threat to their expanding settlement. "You people steal our livestock," the leader had snarled, his weathered face twisted with hatred. "Time someone taught you a lesson." Now, as she sat bound to this post in their makeshift camp, Maria Elena watched the horses grazing nearby. The irony wasn't lost on her that they accused her of stealing animals while keeping her tied up like one. The beautiful mustangs moved freely across the grassland, their manes flowing in the wind, and she envied their freedom with every fiber of her being. The men had been drinking heavily since sunset, their voices growing louder and more aggressive with each passing hour. Their leader, a man named Davidson, kept glancing in her direction with eyes that made her skin crawl. She had heard enough of their conversations to know they planned to use her as an example to scare other indigenous families away from the territory. "Please," she had whispered earlier when one of the younger men brought her water. "I've done nothing wrong. My family has always lived peacefully." The young man had looked away quickly, his face flushed with what might have been shame. "Orders are orders, miss. Davidson says you're staying put until we figure out what to do with you." As night fell deeper around the camp, Maria Elena noticed something moving in the darkness beyond the firelight. At first, she thought it might be one of the horses that had wandered too far from the group. But the movement was too deliberate, too careful. Someone was out there, watching and waiting. The figure moved with the silence of a shadow, circling the camp like a predator studying its prey. Maria Elena strained her eyes to catch another glimpse, her heart racing with a mixture of hope and fear. Could it be her father, finally tracking her down? Or perhaps someone from her mother's tribe who had noticed her disappearance? Davidson stood up suddenly, swaying slightly from the alcohol. "Time to send that message," he announced to his men. "Get some rope and find a good tree. Make sure any other savages in the area can see what happens when they cross us." Terror shot through Maria Elena like lightning. She had known this moment would come, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that stopped her breath. She pulled frantically at her bonds, feeling the rope cut into her already raw wrists. The shadow in the darkness moved closer, and she caught a brief glimpse of a man's profile. He wore simple clothes and moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent his life in the wilderness. His hair was long and dark, and something about his careful movements reminded her of the way her mother's people approached wild animals, with respect and patience. One of Davidson's men grabbed a coiled rope from his saddlebags, while another began scouting the surrounding trees. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks into the night sky like tiny orange stars. Maria Elena closed her eyes and tried to remember her mother's voice singing the old songs, hoping to find courage in the familiar melodies. When she opened her eyes again, the mysterious figure had vanished. Disappointment crashed over her like a cold wave. Perhaps it had been nothing more than a trick of the shadows and her desperate imagination. She was alone with these cruel men, and no one was coming to help her. Davidson approached her with the rope in his hands, his face lit by the orange glow of the fire. "Nothing personal, girl," he said with mock sympathy. "But sometimes examples need to be made. Your kind needs to learn there are consequences for." A low whistle cut through the night air, sharp and clear. It sounded like a bird call, but something about its timing made Davidson pause and look around suspiciously. The other men stopped their preparations and reached for their weapons. "What was that?" one of them asked nervously. "Probably just an owl," Davidson replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "Keep working." The whistle came again, this time from a different direction. Then another and another, until it seemed like the camp was surrounded by invisible birds calling out warnings in the darkness. The horses began to shift restlessly, their ears pricked forward as they sensed something their human captors couldn't yet understand. Maria Elena felt a surge of hope. These weren't random bird calls, they were signals. Someone was definitely out there, and they weren't alone. Her mother had taught her enough about her people's ways to recognize organized communication when she heard it. Davidson cursed under his breath and motioned for his men to spread out around the camp. "Check the perimeter," he ordered, "and keep your guns ready." As the men moved toward the edges of their camp, Maria Elena noticed that the mysterious figure had reappeared near the horses. He moved among them like he belonged there, speaking to them in soft whispers that seemed to calm their nervous energy. The animals trusted him completely, barely lifting their heads as he passed between them. The man worked his way steadily closer to where she was tied, staying low and using the horses as cover. When he was close enough, she could see his face clearly in the moonlight. His features were sharp and weathered, with kind eyes that held depths of knowledge about survival in this harsh land. There was something familiar about him, though she was certain they had never met. "Keep down," he whispered so quietly she almost missed it. "Come with me." But the rope still held her fast to the wooden post. She tugged at her bonds and shook her head frantically, trying to communicate her predicament without making noise. Understanding immediately, the stranger produced a sharp knife from his belt and began sawing carefully at the rope. The sound of Davidson's voice calling out commands grew closer. "I don't like this," he was saying. "Something's not right. We should have seen whatever's making those calls by now." The rope parted with a soft snap just as footsteps approached their position. Maria Elena's rescuer grabbed her hand and pulled her down behind the nearest horse, a large bay mare who stood perfectly still as if she understood the importance of their concealment. "When I say run," the man breathed into her ear, "head for those rocks to the north. Stay low and don't look back." Her heart hammered against her ribs as they waited in the shadows, listening to Davidson's men searching the camp. The horses continued to provide perfect cover, their large bodies blocking the view from the fire. It was as if they were deliberately helping with the escape. "Now," her rescuer whispered. Together, they slipped away from the camp and into the welcoming darkness of the open plains. Running through the darkness with her mysterious rescuer, Maria Elena felt like she was flying across the earth. The man moved with incredible speed and grace, never stumbling or hesitating even in the moonless patches where shadows swallowed everything. She struggled to keep up, her legs shaking from days of captivity and little food, but determination drove her forward. Behind them, angry shouts erupted from the camp as Davidson and his men discovered her absence. The glow of torches began to spread out from their fire like deadly flowers blooming in the night. She could hear horses being saddled hastily and knew the pursuit would begin soon. "This way," her rescuer said softly, leading her toward a cluster of large boulders that rose from the prairie like sleeping giants. "We need to put distance between us and them before sunrise." As they climbed between the rocks, Maria Elena noticed how confidently he moved through terrain that would challenge even experienced outdoorsmen. His hands found handholds in the darkness without fumbling, and his feet never sent loose stones clattering down to give away their position. "Who are you?" she whispered when they reached a small cave hidden behind a curtain of hanging vegetation. "Name's Thomas Running Bear," he replied, settling down beside her and listening carefully to the sounds of the night. "Been tracking you for 2 days." "My father sent you." Thomas shook his head. "Your father doesn't even know you're missing yet. I was passing through the area when I saw those men take you. Couldn't let that stand." Something in his voice told her there was more to his story. In the dim light filtering through the cave entrance, she could see the weathered lines around his eyes and the careful way he positioned himself to watch both the entrance and her reaction. "You've done this before," she said. "It wasn't a question." A sad smile crossed his face. "More times than I care to count. Men like Davidson think they can take whatever they want from people like us. Sometimes someone needs to remind them they're wrong." Thomas reached into a leather pouch at his belt and pulled out strips of dried meat and a small water container. "Eat," he said, handing her the food. "We'll be moving again soon and you'll need your strength." The meat was tough but flavorful, seasoned with herbs she didn't recognize. As she chewed, Thomas continued to scan the landscape outside their hiding place. His attention never wavered, and she began to understand that his vigilance was what had kept him alive in this dangerous work. "How did you know where to find me?" she asked between bites. "Tracked them from your homestead," he explained. "Davidson's men aren't as clever as they think. They left a trail a child could follow, broken branches, horse droppings, even dropped tobacco. They were so confident nobody would come after you, they didn't bother covering their tracks. The sound of distant hoofbeats made them both freeze. Thomas held up a warning hand and crept toward the cave entrance, peering carefully around the rock face. Maria Elena held her breath, trying to make herself as small as possible in the shadows. 6 riders, Thomas whispered after a long moment. Heading east, they're guessing at our direction, which means we have a head start. But even as he spoke, she could hear the hoofbeats getting louder. The riders were coming back, moving in a search pattern that would eventually bring them close to their hiding place. There's something you should know, Thomas said quietly, settling back beside her. Davidson isn't just some random bigot causing trouble. He's working for someone bigger, someone who wants all the mixed-blood families driven out of this territory. A chill ran down Maria Elena's spine. What do you mean? There's good land here, and water. The railroad companies want to buy it cheap, but they can't do that if there are people with legitimate claims living on it. So they hire men like Davidson to make life so dangerous for native families that they'll abandon their homes. The pieces began to fall into place in her mind. Her family's land sat near a natural spring and contained some of the best grazing in the region. She had always wondered why her father got such hostile looks when he went to town for supplies. How many families have they forced out? She asked. Dozens, most just packed up and left after hearing what happened to the ones who tried to stay. Thomas's voice carried the weight of witnessed tragedies. But some folks fought back. Like you. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with old pain. I had a family once, wife and 2 daughters. Davidson's people burned our cabin while I was away hunting, said it was an accident, that they were just trying to scare us. Maria Elena felt tears spring to her eyes. I'm so sorry. That was 3 years ago. Since then, I've been doing what I can to help families get away safely before the violence finds them. Sometimes I'm not fast enough. He looked at her directly. I'm glad I was fast enough for you. The hoofbeats were getting closer now, accompanied by the sound of men's voices calling out to each other. Thomas motioned for her to move deeper into the cave while he positioned himself near the entrance with his rifle ready. They're checking every boulder and hiding spot, he breathed. If they find us here, I need you to promise me something. What? If shooting starts, you run. Don't look back, don't try to help me. Head north toward the big mesa you can see in the distance. There's a trading post on the other side run by a man named Samuel Crowfeather. He'll keep you safe. Before she could protest, the sound of horses stopping directly outside their cave made further conversation impossible. Through the vegetation covering the entrance, they could see the flickering light of a torch. Check behind those rocks, Murphy, Davidson's voice commanded, and be thorough about it. Footsteps crunched on gravel as someone approached their hiding place. Maria Elena pressed herself against the back wall of the cave, hardly daring to breathe. Thomas had gone completely still, his rifle trained on the entrance. The vegetation rustled as someone pushed it aside. A torch appeared, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. Maria Elena could see the silhouette of a man's head and shoulders as he peered into their sanctuary. Nothing here but bat droppings, the searcher called out after what felt like an eternity. Check the next cluster, Davidson replied. They couldn't have gotten far on foot. The torch withdrew and the footsteps moved away. But Thomas didn't relax his vigil until the sound of horses faded into the distance once again. That was too close, he said finally. We need to move now while they're searching the wrong area. As they prepared to leave their temporary shelter, Maria Elena realized that her life had changed forever in the span of a few days. She was no longer just a young woman trying to live peacefully with her family. She had become a refugee, a target, and now possibly a resistance fighter alongside this mysterious tracker who had risked everything to save a complete stranger. Thomas, she said as they emerged from the cave into the pre-dawn darkness. When this is over, when I'm safe, I want to help you. Help other families, I mean. He studied her face in the faint starlight. This kind of work changes people. Once you start fighting back, there's no going back to the quiet life. Maybe the quiet life isn't worth having if it means watching other people suffer. For the first time since meeting him, Thomas Running Bear smiled genuinely. Your mother raised a brave daughter, he said. Come on, we have a long journey ahead of us. Together, they disappeared into the vast wilderness. two figures moving against the forces that would erase their people from the land their ancestors had known for generations. 3 weeks had passed since their escape from Davidson's camp, and Maria Elena barely recognized herself in the reflection of the clear mountain stream. Her soft hands had grown calloused from handling ropes and weapons. Her eyes, once gentle and trusting, now carried the alertness of someone who had seen the worst of human nature and survived it. Thomas had been true to his word about the journey changing her. They had traveled hundreds of miles through territory that most people considered impassable, living off the land and staying ahead of the search parties that Davidson sent after them. Along the way, Thomas had taught her skills her sheltered life had never required: how to read tracks in different types of soil, how to find water in seemingly barren landscape, how to move silently through brush that would trip up inexperienced travelers. But more importantly, he had shown her the network of people fighting back against the systematic removal of indigenous families from their lands. Hidden in remote valleys and forgotten canyons, she met families who had escaped similar fates, as well as others who had chosen to resist rather than run. Samuel Crow Feather's trading post had become their base of operations. The elderly man with silver-streaked braids and knowing eyes ran what appeared to be a simple business selling supplies to travelers. In reality, his establishment served as a communication hub for resistance activities across 3 territories. "Another family was hit last night," Samuel reported as Maria Elena and Thomas returned from a scouting mission. "The Martinez clan, about 30 miles south of here. Davidson's men burned their barn and killed their livestock." Maria Elena felt the familiar surge of anger that had become her constant companion. "How many got away?" "All of them, thanks to the warning system we've put in place, but they lost everything except what they could carry." Thomas studied the crude map spread across Samuel's wooden table. Red marks indicated families that had been forced from their land, while blue marks showed successful relocations to safer areas. The pattern was clear. Davidson and his employers were working systematically across the region. "We can't keep running forever," Maria Elena said, voicing what they were all thinking. "Every family we help escape just gives them another empty piece of land to claim." Samuel nodded gravely. "The girl speaks wisdom. We've saved many lives, but we haven't stopped the cause of the danger." Thomas had been unusually quiet during their recent missions, and Maria Elena suspected she knew why. Each family they helped reminded him of his own loss, and the weight of all that pain was becoming harder for him to carry. "What if we tried a different approach?" she suggested. "Instead of just reacting to Davidson's attacks, what if we went after the real source of the problem?" Both men looked at her with interest. She had proven herself over the past weeks, earning their respect through courage and quick thinking. Her ideas were no longer dismissed as those of an inexperienced newcomer. "The railroad company," she continued. "They're the ones paying Davidson and men like him. What if we made it too expensive for them to continue this campaign?" Thomas leaned forward. "What do you have in mind?" "They're building supply depots to support their expansion into this territory. If those depots kept having mysterious accidents, fires, tools going missing, equipment getting damaged, it would cost them more money than they'd save by driving out a few families." Samuel stroked his beard thoughtfully. "It's dangerous. If they catch anyone sabotaging their operations, they won't just run them out of town. They'll call in federal marshals." "We're already outlaws in their eyes," Maria Elena pointed out. "They put a price on my head just for existing. At least this way we'd be fighting back instead of just hiding." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. All 3 of them immediately reached for weapons, but Samuel held up a calming hand as he recognized the riders. "It's your father," he told Maria Elena. She rushed outside to see her father dismounting from his tired horse, his face gaunt with worry and exhaustion. Behind him rode 2 men she recognized as neighbors from their valley. "Papa," she ran into his arms, feeling like a child again for the first moment in weeks. "Mija, thank God," he whispered, holding her tightly. "When I came home and found the burned fence posts and signs of struggle, I thought—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm safe, Papa. This man, Thomas, he saved me." She gestured toward her rescuer, who had emerged from the trading post with his usual careful alertness. Her father studied Thomas with the measuring look of a man evaluating someone who had protected his most precious possession. After a long moment, he extended his hand. "I owe you a debt I can never repay," he said simply. "Just seeing her safe is payment enough," Thomas replied, shaking the offered hand. But Maria Elena could see the tension in her father's face that went beyond worry about her safety. "What else is wrong, Papa?" "They came to our homestead after you escaped. Davidson and twice as many men as before. They said we had 3 days to pack up and leave, or they'd burn everything with us inside." The familiar rage flared in Maria Elena's chest. "We're not running away. Mija, we have no choice. They have too many guns, too much power. Your mother and we've talked about it. We'll go west, start over somewhere safer." "And what about the Gonzalez family and the Chaveses? If we run, Davidson just moves on to terrorizing them. When does it end?" Her father looked helplessly at Thomas and Samuel, seeking support for his position, but he found none. "Your daughter has become a fighter," Samuel said gently. "Sometimes our children see solutions that our caution blinds us to." Thomas stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, running won't solve this problem. I've seen what happens in other territories where families give in to this kind of pressure. The violence just follows them to their new homes." "What are you suggesting?" her father asked. Maria Elena took a deep breath. "We're going to stop them, Papa. Not just Davidson, but the people who hired him. We're going to make it too expensive for them to continue." She outlined the plan they had been discussing, watching her father's expression shift from disbelief to consideration to reluctant admiration. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "This is not the life I wanted for you," he said finally. "It's not the life any of us wanted," Thomas added. "But sometimes life doesn't give us the choices we prefer." That night, around Samuel's fireplace, they planned what would become known as the Cedar Valley Resistance. Maria Elena's father agreed to return home and pretend to prepare for departure, while secretly organizing their neighbors for coordinated action. Thomas and Maria Elena would target the railroad's supply depot, while Samuel coordinated intelligence gathering from his network of contacts. "Remember," Thomas said as they finalized their plans, "the goal is to make them give up and go somewhere else, not to start a war we can't win. We want them to decide this territory is more trouble than it's worth." 2 days later, Maria Elena found herself crouched in the shadows outside a large warehouse filled with railroad construction supplies. Thomas lay beside her, studying the patterns of the guards through a small telescope. "Two men on the perimeter, one inside checking inventory every hour," he whispered. "Guards change at midnight and dawn." The plan was simple but required precise timing. They would create several small fires in different parts of the depot, making it look like an accident caused by careless storage of oil-soaked materials near lanterns. The goal was destruction without obvious sabotage. As the midnight guard change occurred, they made their move. Maria Elena's job was to create the distraction while Thomas set the charges. Her heart pounded as she approached the front of the building, but her hands were steady as she lit the prepared fuses. The explosions, when they came, were exactly what they had planned, dramatic enough to destroy the depot, but controlled enough to avoid hurting anyone. As flames consumed months of accumulated supplies, Maria Elena and Thomas melted back into the darkness. News of the depot's destruction spread quickly, followed within days by reports of similar incidents at construction sites across the territory. The railroad company found itself losing more money to mysterious accidents than they could possibly save by acquiring land through intimidation. Davidson was called into increasingly angry meetings with his employers, who demanded explanations for why their investment was literally going up in smoke. The pressure on him translated into more desperate and violent raids on indigenous families, but now those families were ready for him. Warning networks allowed people to evacuate before attacks, while carefully planned ambushes made Davidson's raids costly and dangerous for his men. Several of his best fighters quit and left the territory, unwilling to risk their lives for wages that no longer seemed worth the danger. The turning point came 6 months later, when the railroad company announced they were suspending operations in the region indefinitely. The combination of property damage, increased security costs, and negative publicity from reports of violence against local families had made the entire venture unprofitable. Davidson made one last desperate attempt to salvage his employment by planning a massive raid on Samuel's trading post, which he suspected was the center of resistance activities. But Thomas and Maria Elena were waiting for him. The final confrontation took place at dawn in the valley below the mesa where she had first found safety. Davidson rode in with 8 men, expecting to find an easy target. Instead, he found himself surrounded by 20 fighters who had learned to work together with the precision of a military unit. "It's over, Davidson," Thomas called out from his position behind a large boulder. "Your employers have given up and gone home. No one's paying you to terrorize families anymore." "This isn't about money now," Davidson snarled back. "This is about teaching you people your place." "Our place," Maria Elena said, stepping into view with her rifle trained on him, "is right here on the land we've always called home." The standoff lasted only minutes. Faced with organized resistance and the reality that his cause was lost, Davidson chose retreat over a fight he couldn't win. He and his remaining men rode away from the valley and were never seen in the territory again. That evening, as families who had been hiding in the mountains returned to rebuild their homes, Maria Elena stood with Thomas on the ridge overlooking her family's land. Her parents were already planning improvements to their homestead, talking excitedly about expanding their livestock operation now that the threat had passed. "What will you do now?" she asked Thomas. "Now that this fight is over." He smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "There are other territories, other families who need help. This kind of thing is happening all across the frontier." "You're leaving?" "I have to, it's who I am now." He turned to look at her directly. "But you don't have to come with me. You can go back to the quiet life, help your family rebuild." Maria Elena gazed out over the valley where children were already playing in the fields again, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. It was a beautiful, peaceful scene, exactly the life she had thought she wanted. "The quiet life," she repeated thoughtfully. "3 months ago, that was all I dreamed of. And now—" She thought about the families they had helped, the courage she had discovered within herself, the satisfaction of fighting for something bigger than her own comfort. The scared young woman who had been tied to a post in Davidson's camp felt like a different person entirely. "Now I think peace is something you have to fight for," she said finally. "It doesn't just happen by itself." Thomas nodded, understanding. "Samuel could use help coordinating the network from here. You'd be staying close to home but still making a difference." It was a compromise that appealed to her. She could help her family while also using her hard-earned skills to assist other families facing similar threats. The quiet life and the fighting life didn't have to be mutually exclusive. "And maybe," she added with a small smile, "when you're traveling through this area helping other people, you could stop by for supplies and news." "Maybe I could," Thomas agreed. As the stars came out over Cedar Valley, Maria Elena felt a deep sense of completion. She had been bound not just by Davidson's ropes, but by her own assumptions about what her life could be. Thomas Running Bear had freed her from both kinds of chains, showing her that sometimes the greatest liberation comes from choosing to fight for others rather than just protecting yourself. The young woman who walked back toward her family's lamplit home that night was someone who had found her true strength in the most unlikely circumstances, and who would spend the rest of her life using that strength to ensure no one else would ever be bound the way she had been.